Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's 12 o'clock and we're ready to get started. Welcome to our Brown Bag on the Brazos presentation and meeting. We're really glad that everyone is with us. These Brown Bag meetings are meetings that we started back in January to just provide another opportunity for us to share information with the public and share information with our customers and take questions and provide answers and just begin a more in-depth dialogue of what's going on at the Brazos River Authority. So we're really glad that you've joined us today. As with the other brown bags, we're going to maintain a 1-hour timeline so you can get back to your busy day. We'll take questions and answers at the end. Our agenda today kind of looks like this. I'll give you a real brief overview of some of the business that our board of directors recently considered. And then David Thompson, our Chief Financial Officer, will walk you through about a 15-minute presentation on the Brazos River Authority's 2022 budget, a little bit about our rate making and how we make our revenues and the lines of business that we have and kind of what our mission is from a financial perspective. So that'll be very informative. And then we'll end the day with Aaron Abel, and Aaron will walk you through an update on our water supply inventory in all of the reservoirs that the Brazos River Authority owns and in the Army Corps of Engineer reservoirs. So you'll learn about kind of our water status, which is all good because of all the rain that we've had. But that'll be a presentation that Aaron will do, and then we'll take questions and answers at the end. You can either type in your questions through this process, or if you have questions that you want answered outside of this venue, you can go to information@brazos.org and enter your question there, and we'll get back with you as soon as possible and provide you all the information that we can. As I mentioned, our board of directors held its last meeting on July 26th, and we had a tremendous amount of business that we conducted. Obviously, our summer meeting is a very significant meeting because that's where our board of directors considers our upcoming year fiscal budget. And again, David will walk you through all that in a minute. Some of the other items that were discussed and approved at the board meeting, one that was very important to our staff, our integrated water resource planning effort. And for those of you that follow along with the water industry, you're familiar with the state water planning process. This is, if the state water planning process is planning on the 30,000 foot level, this is getting way down into the weeds. So we're taking a multi-year approach and working with stakeholders and prioritizing areas of the basin to begin with to really get in and understand what are the next water supplies. We know that Allen's Creek is eventually going to move forward. We're looking at additional water out of Lake Whitney. We're looking at groundwater in the Carrizo-Wilcox. But we need experts and stakeholders sitting at the table to help us understand how to utilize that water, and then what are the projects that will fall into place after those projects are realized. The stakeholder input is going to be absolutely critical because we want to get down to the level where we understand our customers' needs, their future capital infrastructure needs, and how all those mesh into what are the most affordable ways to develop water and where water needs to be delivered, and really just an in-depth planning effort for the entire Brazos Basin. Right now, we're focusing on the Little River watershed just because it's such a unique part of the Brazos River Basin, and there's just such significant growth that's happening along the I-35 corridor. So that's where we're beginning our efforts. Phase 2 of this water planning activity will focus on other parts of the basin, and eventually we will have a plan for the entire Brazos River Basin. So we're really excited about getting that multi-year effort underway. Stantec is our engineer, and BRA and Stantec will be reaching out to many of our customers in the weeks and months to come to establish our stakeholder involvement and moving that down the road. Another project that our board of directors approved was a multi-million-dollar effort to begin planning for the expansion of our water plant on Lake Granger, the East Williamson County Regional Water System. And it's more than just the evaluation of expanding the plant. It's looking at how to use multiple sources of water potentially how to use ASR, potentially how to bring in Carrizo, potentially how to re-rate the plant to get more out of the plant. We're looking at the treatment delivery system. So it's really just a very large scale, multi-phased approach at how we're going to expand that facility. So the time is critical for us to get started because we're seeing just tremendous growth around East Williamson County, Central Williamson County, and the need for treated water. More treated water is just going to become more critical as time passes. Obviously, we also went to our board for adoption of the strategic plan. We actually had the strategic plan as one of our agenda items for an earlier brown bag that we walked through. Our strategic plan really defines what we do, why we focus on where we focus. You can see that on www.brazos.org if you want to go look at our strategic plan. And we'll start that whole process over this fall on evaluating our strategic plan moving forward. So that ties right in with the budget. And with that, David Thompson, our CFO, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you begin to talk a little bit about the BRA's budget process and our revenues and how we do our financial business.
Will do. Here, let me get the slides up. Can you see the slides?
Yes, sir.
All righty, good. Well, good afternoon. I'd like to just kind of walk through and talk, like Dave was talking about, kind of how BRA gets their funding. I do want to talk about the lines of business and let you know that we are a governmental entity and we do not get our funding from the state, but we actually get our funding from selling water. And the key item is the raw water that we sell. And that is to about 100 customers we have, and it's majority of our revenue. And it's made up of our system rate type customers and also our legacy contracts, which are some of our very old contracts we have. The system rate has both long-term and interruptible water, which is short-term customers. We also have plant operations. BRA owns a treated water plant, East Williamson County, and where we sell water to those customers. We also have customer owned. We have two types. We have what's called cost reimbursable customers, where these are our waste treatment plants like Dozier Farm, Temple Belton, Hutto. And in those cases, we actually cost incurred with those customers, we bill them back to. We also have a raw water transmission line, Williamson County Regional Raw Water Line, that we have in our customer cost reimbursable customers. And then we also have one customer-owned facility, Sugarland, where we get funding from that, and that's based on the contract we have with it. And like any other things, we also have lakeside operations such as water permits, park fees, other things like that. We do get some grants funding for some of the programs we have. The management fees are tied back to the cost reimbursable customers there. We do get a small fee for managing those. And then interest income is from our investment that we have. So let's talk a little bit about the revenue types. We touched on them before. The system rate is one that we take to the board, and we just finished doing that last week. And it's for $83. They're in long-term contracts, 10 to 30 years. The short terms are the interruptible ones. We also have ag contracts as well, and those are approved by the board, and it's 70% of the system rate. Then we have the legacy contracts, which are very old contracts, and those are non-system, and these rates are determined by the contracts themselves. One is the two-tier. We pay, the customer pays one rate for the water used and another rate lower for the water not used. LCRA water, that is also a formula in the contract, and it uses basically the LCRA system rate in that calculation. Utilities is another one that's driven by the contract itself. Now, the two-tier and the utilities both use an element of CPI or Consumer Price Index in the calculation. We also have the waste water system of Sugarland, where that calculation for the contract for the revenue that we get from that is in that. Treated water, we actually sell the treated water to our customers at a certain rate. And then you have grants, which we talked about earlier, and we just get reimbursed for the cost on those. Lake operations, we talked about that. And then cost reimbursable is the last revenues that we do get. And in that, we also get a management fee on top of that. So let's talk a little bit about how we calculate the system rate. We start off with the water supply O&M expenditures. That's our salaries, benefits. It's the department expenses that we have. And we also have bed in there the O&M expenses for the Army Corps of Engineers, O&M expenses for the 8 core lakes we have. And that is to help maintain those 8 core lakes. That's all in the $47.5 million. We then have our debt service. The first is debt service subject to coverage. This is the East Williamson County facility near Taylor. And that there are bond covenants that require us to have coverage for that. And these, I'll talk a little bit more about how we calculate that requirement. Next is the debt service that's not subject. These are loans. We have loans with the Army Corps of Engineers for the water storage in the 8 core lakes we have in our region. But we also have loans for Allen's Creek land purchases. And that is with state participation loans with the Texas Water Development Board. Next, we have operating project expenditures. These are projects, and some can be multiple years, but they're assessments, they're studies. They can be software, anything that does not go out to build our major infrastructure assets that we have out there. And they're included in our rates, giving you a total expense of $59.4. Now, there are other revenues, non-system revenues, and that we talked about earlier. These are our legacy contracts, our utilities, our 2-tier LCRA, that we get about $7.1 million from that. And then we have the other revenue we talked about earlier too, which is East Williamson County selling of treated water, Sugar Land, the operations waste treatment plant we operate there, grants, and other things that we lake permits and other things is in that 11.5, a total of 18.6. Now let's talk a little bit about the debt coverage requirement. 1.3 ratio is a ratio that's been set by our board, but also embedded in the debt itself is a requirement that we must meet these coverages. So you take basically the 0.3 times the 2.5, and that gives you a $761,000 that we must meet. So let's look at what the gross financial requirement is. You take the 59.4, you subtract out the 18.6, and add back the 761, and that gives us a requirement from our system rate holders of 41.6. Divided by the 483,000 acre feet that our system contracts are with our customers, it gives you $86. Now, one of the reserves that the board had approved in our rate making calculation is a thing called rate stabilization reserve. And that's enabling us to be able to pull the rate down to a reasonable level so we don't have huge spikes from year to year. I do want to mention that in the last 2 years, we kept the rates at 79. So going from 79 to 83 or 86 would be a huge increase. So we are utilizing rate stabilization reserve of 1.5 to get the amount down to 40.1 or $83 an acre foot. Oops.
David, can I interject something just real quickly?
Sure.
I want to explain to those that are watching that we no longer sign 2-tier contracts. Those contracts where you pay one rate for the water that you have under contract and you pay another rate for the water that you use. Those aren't advantageous to the way that we make our system rate and the way that we fund our projects. So we haven't signed 2-tier contracts for a long time. The other thing that I want to further expand on just a little bit is our relationship with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, because very few people understand this. However, it's a significant part of our rates. Reservoirs like Lake Whitney, Lake Belton, Lake Proctor, Stillhouse Hollow, and other U.S. Army Corps of Engineer lakes in the Brazos Basin, Lake Somerville, Lake Aquila. The BRA has an agreement where the waters of the state of Texas are stored in those reservoirs and we help pay for the O&M to maintain those reservoirs so that they maintain their ability to release and store water. Those reservoirs are flood reservoirs. We don't pay for any of the flood storage, and we don't pay for and fund the parks. We just basically pay for the ability for the reservoirs to operate and store the state's water. So it's a relationship that we have. Our staff meets with the Corps of Engineers on a frequent basis, 2 or 3 times a year, to go through their projects and their budgets so we can understand what they're rolling in to our invoices that we pay that reflect the system rate that we have that we charge our customers. So it's a really good relationship. The Corps does a great job maintaining their infrastructure and providing a dependable mechanism for storing and releasing water. David, back to you.
Yeah, very good. So let's take a look at some of the contracts we have. We have 724,000 acre feet under contract. As I mentioned, the system rate holders is probably about 65% of the acre feet of the 724. And then we talked about the 2-tier and the utilities, which are some of our very old contracts that we have. Revenues. We've already talked about the 40.1 that we're going to get from our system rate holders, the 7.1 from our legacy contracts, the 11.6 that we could get from other revenues. And then we talked about cost reimbursables. We do, on the cost, we're projecting for FY22 to bill about 18.3 to those customers themselves. This just takes a look at the different rates we have. Now, the system rate and the ag rates were approved by the board. The other rates are basically averages or estimates at this time because we depend on the CPI index and other parts of the formula to calculate those later on this year. Just want to give you an idea of the top 10 customers, and that includes both private and public utility companies and municipalities. Operating expenses. Now, we already talked about the 59.4. Now here we have the cost reimbursable. In this case, the revenue was 18.3 and the O&M expense is 15.1. Later on, I'll show you that we do have 2 capital projects for 3.2 million that the customer will be paying for, so it zeroes out the revenue that we have with the customers. Operating projects, I talked to you about that they do not build out major infrastructures in our basin. They are basically project multi-year, some are multi-years, their studies, their evaluations, they can actually be software related or repairs. So let's talk about the capital improvement plan. Most of it is dealing with new water, and it's probably easier just to go ahead and see the projects we've got going on. Allen Creek is one of the biggest ones we have. We've talked, you got Taylor Gates replacements in limestone. We got the Bellhouse Drought preparedness and Trinity Groundwater. These are multi-year projects, and those are funded out of our reserves that we have. So we talked about the lines of business, and it just illustrates one of the, with the water supply is one that we talked about that has both our system rate customers, our facility owned operations, and then you have basically the cost reimbursable. And here you see the 18.3, the $15 million O&M, and then the 3.2. So cost reimbursables do zero out at the end of the year. What I want to show here in this slide is we start FY22 with about 118 million in reserves. We will be paying out of those reserves all of the capital projects that we have. And that means it has no impact to the system rate holders in the long term. We end up with 55 million that will be used also in the next year to help pay for those capital projects as well. So let's look at the 5-year plan. You can see that we start borrowing money in 2023, and then we do have some very large capital expenditures that we go out into the 5-year plan, and it goes on beyond that. We also are going to use the rate stabilization reserve one more time in 23. After that, the rates are pretty much on track, which I expect that will prevent any spikes in the future as we build out these major pieces of capital infrastructure in our basin. The working capital reserve is our 90 days requirement in many of the bond covenants that we have to maintain cash flow at least to that level. And we exceed that. Here just summarizes the rates that we have. And they're very reasonable in increases, and they're in line with what I've been showing for the last 2 years to our customers and to our board. And the debt coverage must be met in each of those years to meet the bond covenants. And this just basically takes a look at the rates over the last 10 years. My goal is to maintain a very steady increase in rates to match the amount of expenditures we expect out in the outer years. I put questions in here. I didn't know if we want to wait till the end for that, or if there's any questions, I'll take those now.
Yeah, David, let's wait till the end. As people type questions and submit them to us, we'll attempt to answer them.
No problem.
A couple of things that I want to add to the presentation. First of all, I want to tell you just a little bit about our budget process. We basically just got our budget approved by our board of directors in July, and lo and behold, we'll kind of start next year's budget process in September. And it really gets rolling full steam downhill around November and December. So budgeting is really a year-long process, and it finds its way throughout the entire organization, all the way down to our operation teams that manage our facilities. So everybody has their fingers on it, and we can really best understand the dollars that we need to spend and how to be good stewards of the rates that we charge. We're doing some risk-based asset management enhancements to the way that we do our business, how we manage our projects. Ultimately, that will allow us to better understand the maintenance and capital projects that will be 5 and 10 and 15 years out. So it'll allow us a better tool for predicting what's going to have to be included in future budgets. So we're really excited about that. One of the slides that David showed you, or two of the slides that he showed you, listed different projects. Really excited to announce that in the weeks and months to come, we're working on a way of reporting on many of those projects on our webpage, www.brazos.org. So anybody that's interested in the projects that we're doing at our dams or water supply projects, you can follow along with where we are in the lifetime of that project and get updates on that. So we think that's going to be a really valuable tool in helping us be more transparent with how we do our projects, how we spend our money, and how we are accountable to our customers and the public. So we're real excited about those things. Now I'm going to turn the program over to Aaron Abel, and Aaron's going to give you an update on our water supply to reservoirs. Aaron?
All right. Thank you, David. Let me share my screen here. Can everybody see my screen? Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, today I'm going to give a pretty quick update on the water supply. As David mentioned, we've been blessed with some nice rain over the last 3 months, and so we'll kind of talk about that and where we were and where we are now and what to expect going forward a little bit. So about 3 months ago on April 29th, we had 100% of our basin was in some drought category. So the drought monitor, we have two drought monitors here, one on April 29th and one that was produced this morning, August 5th. So on the left, you can see all these colors of yellow to dark reddish brown, and anywhere from abnormally dry to exceptional drought in the far upper basin. That was kind of what the picture was at the end of April. And on the right, you can see where we are now. So we were fortunate to receive the necessary rainfall that essentially erased the drought impacts that they were more or less intensifying in late April. Last time the entire basin was free of drought was actually a couple of years ago on July 2nd of 2019. It's one other thing to point out is the drought actually that was broken towards the end of April and first part of April really started last year with a drier than normal fall, and that kind of continued on with below normal rainfall into the first part of this year. In late April, we had long range seasonal forecasts that were calling for May, June, and July to be below normal, and fortunately that didn't happen, and we are we're in a good position for water supply moving forward. This is a map that depicts the 90-day observed rainfall, and this is compiled by the National Weather Service and NOAA. The color scale on the right is the amount of rainfall that was actually observed across the state and in the Brazos Basin that's outlined in black. So you can see the tans and reds are very high amounts, and so most of the basin from just downstream of Lubbock through the heart of the basin and the lower basin received widespread 10 to 20 inches of rain over the last 3 months. Some areas between the Possum Kingdom and Granbury area have received 20 to 25 inches. And then further downstream in the Austin County to Fort Bend and Brazoria counties received 35 or more inches over the last 3 months. And those areas with 35 inches or more, that's receiving about 60 to 70% of the rainfall in those 3 months. And looking ahead, October is another month that we can have some high rainfall amounts. So I don't think we're done with rainfall this year. Summer is here, but we'll have some more rain. This map depicts the 90-day observed rainfall compiled by National Weather Service, and it's the departure from normal. So what you see here is the amount of rain above and beyond what you would normally find over the last 3 months. So downstream of Lubbock, down to the central part of the basin, we received widespread 8 to 12 inches of rain above what normally falls in that May, June, July period. So looking further downstream, some areas around Hempstead and downstream through the mouth of the river at the Gulf received over 16 inches of rain above what normally falls in that period. So it's been abnormally wet even for May, June, July. This is our weekly water supply status graphic that we produce every Wednesday and post to our website. It shows the status of the 11 reservoirs within the water supply system. So just to refresh everybody, Possum Kingdom, Granbury, and Limestone are our 3 BRA owned and operated water supply reservoirs. And then we have the 8 other core reservoirs that BRA holds contracts to store water in those core owned and operated reservoirs. And then we have water rights for all 11 reservoirs. So I'm going to note the blue area represents the full storage. So all these columns represent where the reservoirs are located and proportionally how large they are to the other reservoirs. So Possum Kingdom and Whitney are 2 large reservoirs, and the blue area is the full storage. So that's the amount of water that's actually being stored. And you'll see in the table in the upper right that represents the percent full of each of the reservoirs and then the drawdown at each of the reservoirs. So we're doing really, really good for this time of the year for early August. I mean, we have all of our reservoirs are 95% or full, except with the exception of Lake Georgetown, which is just under 90% full. I want to point out that at Lake Whitney, Brazos River Authority, we have contracted with the Corps for only about 50,000 acre feet of storage and that's available to us between elevations 533 and 520. The rest, about 190,000 acre feet, is reserved for hydropower operations. So you may ask, well, why is Whitney below full? And it's they've continued to generate for hydropower for electric demands on the grid over the last couple weeks as the reservoir level dropped below the top of conservation. So, and I guess one other point to make is, Lake Georgetown it's not quite full, but it's one of the reservoirs that we have high demands, and but we're doing it. We're in a good position at Lake Georgetown with it almost being 90% full. This slide shows the maximum amount of water that the Corps had temporarily stored in the flood pool since May 1st. So, over the last 3 months, there's been a lot of inflows, and a lot of the water that flowed into the Corps reservoirs is stored temporarily to mitigate flooding downstream. So this is at the peak of the wet weather that we've had over the last 3 months. This is how much water was stored in the flood pool at each of the reservoirs. So the light blue represents the total capacity of the flood storage for those 8 reservoirs. The cross-hatched is actually what was stored at the maximum amount of flood storage in over the 3 months. And then obviously the conservation pool is the blue, and then we have the Powerhead pool at Lake Whitney. So I guess the take-home message here is the flood pools of all the reservoirs were not nearly full, and the Corps could have handled a lot larger amount of inflows into the reservoirs, if it had rained a lot more. So, there's a lot of storage there, and basically as the Corps impounds the flood water, it takes anywhere from weeks to a month or more to slowly evacuate the flood storage at the end of a flood event. So they're looking at evaluating the downstream conditions to ensure that the evacuation of the flood pools don't contribute to downstream flooding. So this graphic here represents the total amount of inflow into the BRA system of 11 reservoirs. So this does include the 8 Corps reservoirs and then the 3 reservoirs that we own and operate over the last 3 months, and then also dating back to 2015. So the May, June, July volumes of inflow at each of the for the total system. So you can basically see that in 2021 we did have definitely higher inflows compared to the drier years of 2020, 2018, and 2017. 2015 and 2016 and 2019 were also pretty wet springs and into summers, if you will. And so that just kind of points out that it was a wet 3 months, but not completely out of the realm of possibilities as we've seen in previous years. The graphic in the upper right represents what the amount of water supply release that we had in 2018 and 2020, those 2 dry years. So during dry times, the river flows downstream in the lower basin, get to a point where some of our customers can't divert water from the river, and they require stored water to be released from the reservoirs. So when we don't get rain and there's no releases, that requires some system releases to satisfy those demands in the lower basin. This graphic represents the May, June, July discharge volume at the Brazos River gauge at Richmond. So Richmond is about just under 100 river miles from the mouth of the Brazos along the coast, and this dates back to basically the last 11 years from May of 2010. So each bar represents the amount of volume that flows past the gauge on a monthly basis for those 3 months. And just for everybody's, reference, 1 acre feet is about 326,000 gallons. So it's a lot of water. In July and over the course of the last 3 months, there's been about 4.5 million acre feet that has flowed past the Richmond gauge. And, so that's a lot of water. And it's comparable to what we saw in in 2019. 2015 and 2016 were also wet years that, I mean, we're definitely a little bit wetter than and higher flow volumes than what we saw this year. And we also provided some the monthly discharge volume that what you would normally see in May, June, July. And so over the period of record for the USGS gauge at Richmond. So in June, you typically see about 700,000 acre feet, but we saw, around 2.5 million acre feet for this year. So we've definitely been above normal as far as the flow volumes in the lower basin. Switching gears just a little bit, but we wanted to point out the release volumes for the three Brazos River Authority water supply reservoirs since 2011. So this is the amount of water that was released from Possum Kingdom, Lake Granbury, and Lake Limestone from January through July over the last 11 years or so. So you can see in 2021, since the January 1st, we've had a little over 2 million acre feet of water that was released from our three reservoirs, and that's a pretty significant amount of water. So, a good part of the water that flowed past the Richmond gauge originated from our three reservoirs in our system. Oh, one thing that we wanted to point out as it relates to the upper part of the basin is how much water flowed past the Clear Fork gauge at Fort Griffin. This gauge is situated about 150 river miles upstream of the dam at Possum Kingdom, and each bar represents the total flow volume from May 1st through the end of July that passed this gauge upstream of PK. So every year represents basically the May, June, July flow volume. And well, the biggest thing that you can see is what happened this year is it's about it is the fourth highest flow volume over the last 82 years in the period of record that is associated with the Fort Griffin gauge. So that's definitely it was wetter than normal and in the upper basin, and all of these flows that are sourced from around the Abilene area and upstream traveled downstream and was passed through Possum Kingdom Reservoir and through Lake Granbury and then finally to Whitney. So it was definitely wet from the upper part of the basin to the lower part of the basin over the last 3 months. Looking ahead at what potentially may have happened or what they're thinking right now as far as the seasonal outlook. NOAA releases these drought tendency outlooks on a monthly basis, and it's typically released at the middle part of each month, and it's valid for the next 3 months. So this outlook was released on July 15th, and it's valid through the end of October. And you can see areas in brown indicate that drought conditions are expected to persist, and that you see out west and in northern part of the states, drought persisting. Areas in tan are areas where drought development is likely, and then the green and the tan area represents areas that drought removal is likely. I guess the tan is actually your drought remains but improves. So even though summer seems to totally have gotten here as far as the Brazos River Basin, we couldn't really be in a better position as far as the water supply conditions. Looking forward, we'll probably definitely have some summer conditions in August as we're seeing right now in September. But October is another month that we'll likely see rainfall. So I think that's the end of presentation for water supply.
Aaron, talk just a little bit about, well, let me back up. I used to have a supervisor that every Friday would greet you with Happy Friday. We're one day closer to Monday. So with that said, the one thing about the natural disaster phenomenon of drought is that we never know when the next drought starts. So talk about how we manage every drop of water this is not how we manage every drop of water, but what I'm trying to get at is talk a little bit about our water use report that comes out, and where folks can go and see that, and the type of data that displays, and because it's a really useful document that folks can use to learn more about managing our water.
Yeah, absolutely. So every year, as far as water use, every year we, in the March to April timeframe, we produce a pretty detailed graphic that represents water use by reservoir and by segment of the basin, and by customer. And it's a great resource to explain how the water is used, what portion of the water is inflows, how much evaporation occurs at the reservoirs, and that's done. We start compiling that as the water use reports are completed from an annual basis, and put that on the website towards the end of March to early April time frame. We also, as it relates to a week-to-week basis, we have, as I mentioned, the water supply graphic that we update. That's a week-to-week basis. We're producing those, and that's available on the www.brazos.org, and you can go to the water supply section, and there's a wealth of information related to water supply, drought outlook, and a number of other aspects to water supply at the Brazos River Authority.
Thanks, Aaron. And I would also tell people that you can go to our webpage, and we have some really informative videos that we did about a year and a half ago that talk about our water supply, how we operate our dams, why we release water. So let's jump into a little bit of Q&A. And Aaron, while I've got you on the line, don't leave me yet. Talk a little bit about the question is, would it be possible to keep the upper basin between PK and Granbury Lakes at a minimum flow of 200 CFS between Memorial Day and Labor Day to allow for quality recreation for people along the river? Talk a little bit about why we release water and when we release water as it relates to flood flows and mimicking flows that are coming in. And then also talk about how we release water for our downstream customers, and why we basically can't release 200 CFS nonstop in preparation for the next drought.
Yeah, as it relates to our operations and what we have to do, and as I mentioned, our 3 reservoirs are water supply reservoirs, and we have no flood control storage. So once the reservoirs get full and we have rain on already full reservoirs, what we have to do is release water and pass those inflows in real time downstream by opening gates, by opening Tainer gates, and passing that water downstream. And that the goal is, we have to mimic nature, because if we don't, the water level will rise to a certain degree, and that can impact the integrity of the dams, and we can't have that. So during flood times, there's no way to put it other than we have to release what comes in, and we have protocols and procedures and constraints related to that. And as far as the upper basin, the last 3 months, it was really dictated by, the rainfall that occurred on top of PK and on top of Granbury and upstream. As we pointed out, we had a lot of water that was sourced from upstream, and that's why we had prolonged releases in some instances. And so when it's wet, we can't. We have to release what comes in to manage the reservoir level and keep it at safe levels to avoid having issues with the dam. As it relates to water supply, when we get into drier conditions like we are now, we still have some residual inflows, and we're releasing a little bit more. More as far as Possum Kingdom is concerned, we're releasing more than our FERC minimum flow requirements, or our minimum flow requirements that we have associated with our water rights. That's right now it's 75 CFS, but we're actually releasing about 130 CFS. And so we have to look at downstream customer demands as far as the timing and when and how much we release water during dry conditions. But as it relates to having maintaining a 200 CFS release rate from Memorial Day, so end of May, through Labor Day, we just can't do that. If we're in a drought conditions, we can't release water just to release water, because that would severely impact the amount of storage that we have in our reservoirs, and it would jeopardize the amount of water that we could provide to our customers. So we have to, once we get into drier conditions, we have to conserve and impound the water that we have, and then look downstream as far as what our demands are, and supplying those demands to our customers. So that's it's a balancing act. So.
Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate that. Some other questions that we've received over time. Why don't you dredge up the sandbars in some of the reservoirs? I'll address that one. The reservoirs, the sandbars will continue to grow and move as water coming into the reservoirs that's carrying sediment, and how that deposits and the speed of the water changes. So the sandbars are always changing, and that on top of the fact that it's very, very, very expensive to dredge. Also, in most cases, to dredge requires approval from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and getting that approval is not easy, because sometimes there are environmental concerns toward what you may be dredging, or where you may be putting the dredge, or the fish habitat or species habitat that you're actually moving or destroying, as some would see it when you move those sandbars. So it becomes really a hard act to manage, and really expensive to do to manage those sandbars. That's a really good question. Another question that we received is why can't I put my own no-wake buoys out? And I'll answer that one also. Our reservoir offices are the part of our organization that install those no-wake buoys, and they're put into locations based on a certain set of criteria. So if you have an area that you think needs a no-wake buoy, you can reach out to our lake offices, and they would assess that. So, but again, no-wake buoys are regulatory, and for a buoy location to be an enforceable violation, it has to meet our criteria. Let me see here. Let me follow along, make sure I've got all the questions answered. A question about duck blinds. Why don't you have more duck blind locations? For those of you that don't know, on some of our reservoirs, we permit duck blinds for duck hunting in the winter. And basically, we have the duck blind locations based on criteria also that consider the safety of the public and nearby homes and infrastructure. So we have as many that we feel comfortable in permitting that allows us to maintain some safe duck hunting. So that's kind of how we deal with the duck blinds. You can reach out to our local reservoirs, or get more information about duck hunting and the duck blind permitting process on our webpage. Also, got a question about feral hog hunting, and we do not allow feral hog hunting on BRA properties. However, feral hogs do cause us problems because they're always wanting to get behind our dams and root up and get on our property and do damage. So we feel the pain of many landowners and farmers that have to deal with feral hogs. So, and then last but not least, another good question: do I have to have a permit to do maintenance on my dock? General maintenance does not require a permit. However, any change that results in a change to the footprint of the dock will require a permit. So feel free to reach out to our reservoir operations, questions about modifying your docks or making any changes. So again, all of the slides that you saw today will be on our webpage. You can go to our webpage and view our board agendas and view our board meetings. And in some amount of time, we like to itemize those based on agenda items. So you don't have to go sit through the entire board meeting. You can just go find an agenda item and click on it and listen to that item if you want. Our next board meeting will be September the 27th. And then our next brown bag will be on October the 7th. So with seeing no further questions, again, I sincerely appreciate everybody tuning in. I hope this was useful. You can go on information@brazos.org to submit more questions, or if there's topics for future brown bags that you'd be interested in seeing, please let us know. So again, everyone have a great afternoon, and thank you very much.